She knew many things, Ace said carefully. Most of them she wouldn't explain. She'd say some knowledge is kept by not speaking of it. That silence is its own form of preservation. Layla closed her laptop with a soft click that seemed unnaturally loud. In the growing darkness, we all turned to look at her. I found it, she said quietly. The alignment doesn't point to any current celestial event. But when I ran the calculations backward through time, accounting for axial precession, the slow wobble of Earth's rotation that shifts the position of stars over millennia, she trailed off, her expression troubled in a way I'd never seen on her usually confident face. Layla, I prompted gently, 4,300 years ago, a star rose at exactly this azimuth, Thuban, Alpha Draconis. It was the pole star when the Egyptians built the pyramids, the star they used to align the descending passages in those massive monuments. Owen whistled softly. That predates Christianity by 3,000 years. It predates a lot of things, Layla said. Judaism, Zoroastrianism, most of what we think of as ancient religion. And that's not the disturbing part. She opened her laptop again, turning it so we could all see the screen. On it was a photograph of an ancient cuneiform tablet, the wedge-shaped characters, pressed into clay that had been baked hard by fire or time. Beside it was a translation in neat academic English. This is from a Sumerian astronomical text, circa 2100 BC, from the temple archives at Nippur. They called this specific stellar position, this exact point on the horizon where Thuban rose, the eye of the abyss. It's mentioned in exactly 3 texts that survive from that period. All 3 are connected to apotropaic rituals, rituals specifically designed to turn away evil, to prevent something from seeing or entering or manifesting. The temperature seemed to drop as she spoke, though that might have been the sun disappearing behind the hills. Father Grigor reached into his ancient leather satchel and withdrew a manuscript, the vellum yellow with age and covered in careful Greek characters. Then you'll want to see this. It's from our library at Mor Gabriel, a 4th century account by Father Severus of Edessa, a monk who travelled extensively throughout this region, documenting early Christian sites and practices. He handled the manuscript with obvious reverence, turning pages with careful fingers until he found what he was looking for. This is a copy, of course. The original is far too fragile for fieldwork, but I had it made specifically for this trip. Listen. He read aloud, translating from the Greek as he went, his voice taking on a formal, liturgical quality. I came in the month of Dios to the house that faces away from God's light, guided there by brothers who would speak of it only in whispers. I found there a community of believers, poor but faithful, who prayed in a manner I had never witnessed. They stood with their backs to the altar, facing not toward the east, as is proper and commanded, but toward the entrance that opens to the northwest. When I questioned this practice, demanding explanation for such heterodoxy, the priest, a man ancient beyond measure whose name I was never given, told me this. We do not worship here facing toward God, for God knows where we stand and what we do. We worship facing away from what God has turned his face from. We keep the watch that was kept before the gospel came, before the prophet spoke, before Abraham left Ur of the Chaldees. Some vigils began in darkness and will end only when all darkness is consumed by light. The silence that followed was profound and unsettling. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, the sound thin and lonely across the darkening plateau. Father Grigor continued, his voice softer now. Severus pressed for more information, as was his nature. He was a scholar, curious and thorough. The priest told him that this place existed before the apostles came, before Christ walked in Galilee. When Christianity arrived in this region, brought by missionaries travelling the old trade routes, they didn't destroy this site as they destroyed so many pagan temples. They didn't rip down the stones or build over them or consecrate them to new purpose. Instead, they incorporated it, blessed it, made it part of their own tradition. But they didn't change its orientation. They didn't turn it around. The priest told Severus, and I'm translating directly here, some vigils began before Christ and will continue until he returns. Some duties were given to humanity before revelation, and those duties transcend what came after. Ace was nodding slowly, her eyes distant as if remembering. My grandmother said the same thing, though she used different words. She said this place was old when old was young, that it was built to watch, not to pray. That watching was its own form of prayer, perhaps the oldest form. I found my voice, though it came out rougher than I intended. Watch for what? No one answered. The darkness had deepened around us, and someone lit the camp lanterns. The warm glow pushed back the night, but somehow made the silence more oppressive, as if we'd created a small island of light surrounded by something vast and patient. The next morning, Owen began excavating test trenches with the careful methodology that had made his reputation. With Ace's coordination and the ministry's blessing, we'd assembled a small crew of local workers and graduate students from Daikal University in Diyarbakir, young people eager for field experience and the chance to be part of something significant. The work was slow and meticulous, documenting every layer of soil and stone, taking photographs and measurements, bagging samples for later analysis. This was archaeology at its most painstaking, the kind of work that looked boring from the outside, but revealed secrets to those patient enough to listen. On the third day, Owen called me to the northern trench just after lunch. I found him standing waist deep in the excavation, staring at something with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Danny, you need to see this. Bring Father Grigor and Layla too." I gathered them and we climbed down into the trench carefully, mindful of the fragile stratigraphy. The excavation was now nearly 2 meters deep, exposing clear, distinct layers like the pages of a book, written in dirt and stone. Owen pointed to each one, his voice taking on the tone of a lecturer presenting evidence to a skeptical audience. Top layer, Byzantine period, approximately 520 AD. You can see the characteristic mortar composition, the way the stones are dressed. Beneath that, late Roman, around 380 AD, distinguished by the different building technique and the presence of these terra sigillata pottery fragments. Third layer, 290 AD, right in the middle of the Diocletian persecution, when being Christian could get you executed. The construction is hasty here, less refined, as if they built quickly and without drawing attention. He paused, making sure we were following. 4 building phases at minimum, but look here. He knelt and brushed dirt away from the lowest layer they'd reached, with a soft brush, revealing stones that were clearly different from everything above. This foundation is earlier, much earlier. I'm dating it preliminarily to approximately 245 AD, which would make it one of the earliest purpose-built Christian structures ever found. Not a house church, not a converted building, but something constructed specifically for Christian worship before Constantine made it legal, before Christianity was anything more than a persecuted sect. My heart was racing. This alone would be a career-defining discovery. "That's extraordinary," I managed. "It gets better, or worse, depending on your perspective." He moved to the corner of the excavation and indicated a massive stone block that formed the foundation's corner. These aren't Christian foundation stones, they're older, much older, and they're not from around here. The block was basalt, dark and dense, and utterly different from the local limestone we'd been seeing everywhere else. It was cut with a precision that spoke of advanced stoneworking techniques, faces so flat and true that you could barely slip a knife blade between them and the adjacent stones. There were no Christian symbols, no decorative elements, no maker's marks, just smooth, precise faces meeting at perfect right angles. The kind of work that required not just skill but sophisticated tools and mathematical understanding. How much older? I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. I sent samples to the lab in Ankara for thermoluminescence dating. Preliminary results came back this morning. He pulled out his phone and showed me an email with a lot of technical jargon that eventually resolved into a date. These stones were quarried and placed approximately 2100 BC, early Bronze Age, contemporary with the third dynasty of Ur in Mesopotamia, the Middle Kingdom in Egypt. I sat back on my heels trying to process what he was saying. Early Bronze Age, before Abraham, before Moses, before any of the religious traditions we associate with this region. Yes, and here's what really troubles me. What keeps me awake at night thinking about it. Owen's voice was quiet now, almost reverent. Every Christian rebuild used the exact same foundation footprint. Same dimensions, same orientation, same alignment. The believers who built the 290 AD structure could have built anywhere on this plateau. They could have chosen any of 100 locations with better water access, better protection from wind, better visibility, but they chose to build here, on these exact stones facing this exact direction. And when that building fell, the people who rebuilt it in 380 AD made the same choice. And again, in 520 AD. The location was important enough that they preserved it across catastrophe and collapse. For 2,000 years? Layla asked. For 4,000 years, Danny, Owen said, looking at me directly. Someone, multiple someones across multiple civilizations, and religions, and languages, has been maintaining this alignment for 4,000 years. That's longer than the pyramids have stood. That's longer than any institution in human history, except perhaps human language itself. Whatever this place is, whatever it's for, people have cared about it for longer than they've cared about almost anything else. That evening, a van arrived from Ankara, carrying Dr. Yusuf Okan, an epigraphist Isa had contacted through the ministry. He was young, perhaps 30, with the eager energy of someone who loved his work and couldn't quite believe he got paid to do it. He wore glasses that were always slightly crooked and carried notebooks in every pocket, constantly scribbling observations and ideas. "Show me the inscription," he said, barely pausing to introduce himself properly, already pulling cameras and measurement tools from his bag. Ace said there was text, early Syriac possibly, and I need to see it before the light changes. I led him to the entrance where the ancient carvings were most visible in the late afternoon light that raked across the stone at a sharp angle. Yusuf studied them in absolute silence, occasionally taking photographs with a high-resolution camera, making sketches in his notebook with quick, confident strokes, comparing what he saw to references he pulled up on a tablet computer. The concentration on his face was intense, almost painful to watch. After more than an hour, he straightened, removing his glasses to clean them on his shirt. "This is early Syriac, 3rd century, possibly late 2nd, he said, Greek loanwords throughout, which is consistent with the period and region. The script is damaged by weathering, but the text is still legible if you know what you're looking at." He paused, checking his notes as if wanting to be absolutely certain. "The translation is, not toward the light, away from the darkness." Father Grigor crossed himself slowly, right to left in the orthodox manner, his lips moving in what might have been prayer. "There's more," Yusuf continued, pointing to smaller characters below the main text that were barely visible even in the raking light. Below it, carved by the same hand. "Let no man turn this house. The verb there is specific. It doesn't mean destroy or abandon. It means reorient. Change the direction, turn around." The implication hung in the air like smoke. This wasn't just a church. It wasn't even just an ancient church. It was something that had to remain exactly as it was, facing exactly where it faced, maintained and preserved across millennia, for reasons the inscription didn't explain. Why? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Why is the orientation so critical that they carved a prohibition into the stone? Yusuf shook his head slowly. The inscription doesn't say, but the phrasing is very interesting from a linguistic standpoint. Away from the darkness uses a Greek word, skotos, that has specific theological connotations in early Christian texts. It doesn't just mean the absence of light, the simple darkness of night, or a shuttered room. It means primordial chaos, the void before creation, the formless deep that existed before God said, "Let there be light." It's the darkness that isn't just empty, but actively opposed to order and meaning and existence itself. Layla had been listening quietly, but now she spoke up, her voice thoughtful. "I've been researching the stellar alignment, digging through archives and databases from a dozen different institutions. Thuban appears in texts from multiple ancient cultures. Sumerian, as I mentioned, but also Babylonian, Egyptian, even early Chinese astronomical records. And they all describe it in remarkably similar terms, despite having no contact with each other. The eye, the watcher, the opening. Different languages, different metaphors, but the same basic concept." "Opening to what?" Owen asked, the question all of us were thinking. That's where the texts become fragmentary or deliberately vague, as if the scribes themselves didn't want to write it down clearly. But there's a pattern. Whenever Thuban is mentioned in connection with this specific stellar rising point, this exact azimuth, it's always in the context of turning away, building structures that face away from it, performing rituals with your back to the sky, refusing to look directly at it when it rises. It's as if, she hesitated, choosing her words carefully, as if every culture that noticed this phenomenon independently concluded that it was dangerous to observe it directly, that seeing it or being seen by it was something to be avoided. That night, Ace shared something she'd been working on privately. She'd spent the past week interviewing elderly residents from the surrounding villages, tracking down people whose families had lived in this region for generations, before the upheavals of the 20th century scattered communities and broke the chains of oral tradition. She'd recorded hours of conversations, some in Turkish, some in the local Aramaic dialect called Turoyo, some in Kurdish. Most people knew nothing about the site or claimed not to, but a few, the very old, the ones whose memories reached back to before the First World War, had stories. She gathered us around the camp table after dinner as darkness fell and the temperature dropped. The lantern light made our shadows dance on the tent walls as she set up her laptop and external speakers. "I want you to hear these in order," she said, "because there's a progression, a deepening. The first is an old woman from Midyat, 91 years old, speaking in Turoyo. She played the recording, and we heard a voice thin with age but still clear. Still certain, Ace translated as it played, her voice soft and respectful. "My grandfather said there was a bell tower here, before the Troubles, before 1915, before the soldiers came and the world ended. The bells were bronze, cast in Urfa, blessed by the patriarch himself. They rang for services, for weddings, for deaths as bells do. But they rang at other times too. Twice in my grandfather's lifetime they rang in the middle of the night, waking the whole village. Once during the solar eclipse of 1912, when the sun went dark at midday and the stars came out and the birds stopped singing. Again in 1927, during another eclipse, though this one was only partial. He never knew why they rang at those times. His father told him it was tradition, older than memory, older than the church itself. You ring the bells when it might look this way, his father said, when the light changes in ways it shouldn't." The recording continued, the old woman's voice taking on a strange quality, almost sing-song, as if reciting something she'd heard many times. He said his father said the bells were a warning, not to people, People would hear them and cross themselves and go back to sleep, knowing that someone was keeping watch. The bells were a warning to something else, to tell it that we were still here, still watching, still keeping the faith, that we hadn't forgotten our duty, even though most of us had forgotten what the duty was. Ace stopped the recording. That last phrase troubled me. The idea that they were keeping a duty they no longer understood. So I asked around, tried to find someone who might know more. This next recording is a man from a village that no longer exists, speaking about his uncle who was the last person to try to restore the site. She played the second recording. The man's voice was deeper, rougher, the Turkish heavily accented. My uncle, God rest him, he wanted to restore the old church. This was in the 1960s, when there was talk of bringing tourists to the region, of preserving our heritage. He was a pious man, my uncle. He got permission from the authorities, raised money from the community. He started by planting a wooden cross inside the ruins, facing east like proper Christian crosses should face, like every cross in every church faces, toward Jerusalem, toward salvation. The man paused and we heard what sounded like him lighting a cigarette, but every morning we found it turned around, facing the wrong way, facing northwest where nothing is. The first morning, my uncle thought someone was playing a joke. The second morning he got angry, accused some boys from the village. The third morning he put a lock on the gate, stood watch himself until midnight, then went home to sleep. At dawn, the cross was turned again. This continued for a week. Every night, my uncle would set it facing east. Every morning, it would be facing northwest. On the seventh day, he went to the site before sunrise, determined to catch whoever was doing this. He found the cross broken in two pieces, split straight down the middle, as if struck by lightning, though there had been no storm. Another pause, another drag on the cigarette. We buried the pieces in consecrated ground, and my uncle never went back to the site. He never spoke of it again, except to say that some things are the way they are for reasons we shouldn't question, that our ancestors weren't stupid, and if they built something facing the wrong direction, maybe it was the right direction for the wrong reasons. I never understood what he meant, but I remember how he looked when he said it. Like a man who'd seen something that changed what he thought he knew about the world. The third recording was brief, almost anticlimactic after the others, but somehow it disturbed me, more than the previous two. A shepherd, his voice matter-of-fact and untroubled, describing something he'd noticed over years of bringing his flock to graze in the area. My dogs won't go near that place, good dogs, brave dogs. I've seen them chase off wolves, and protect the lambs. But that old church foundation, they won't approach it. Not because they're afraid, you understand. Fear has a smell, a behavior. A frightened dog cowers or barks or runs. My dogs just won't acknowledge it exists. If I stand in what used to be the doorway and call them, they look past me. Their eyes track to where I am, but it's like I'm transparent. Like the whole place is transparent. They see through it to something behind or beyond, and whatever they see doesn't include me or the stones or anything about the church. It's the strangest thing I've ever witnessed. We sat in silence after the recordings ended. The night had grown cold, and someone had started a fire in the camp stove, but I didn't feel any warmer. Finally, Father Grigor spoke, his voice heavy with the weight of what he was about to share. Severus's manuscript contained something else I didn't share earlier. I wanted to wait until I'd heard what others had found, to see if it corroborated or contradicted. But after hearing these testimonies, after seeing what you've all discovered, I think you need to know. He withdrew another photograph from his satchel, this one showing a different manuscript page, the writing smaller and more cramped, as if written quickly or in poor light. 3 weeks after visiting this site, Severus made a final entry in his private journal. Not his official travel diary that he submitted to his bishop, but a personal journal we've kept at Moor Gabriel for 1600 years. We don't usually share it, it's part of our private archive, but these are exceptional circumstances. He read slowly, his voice careful and measured. I have prayed for understanding of what I witnessed at the House of Watching. I have fasted and kept vigil and begged God for illumination. No understanding has come. I'm reminded of what the Apostle Paul wrote to the Corinthians. For now we see through a glass, darkly. But at that place I fear the glass is turned away not for our punishment but for our protection. That God in his mercy has allowed us ignorance where knowledge would destroy us. I've asked the bishop to strike my account from the official record. Some knowledge is not meant for dissemination. Some truths, if they are truths, should not be spoken, where they might be heard and believed and acted upon. Father Grigor looked up at us, his eyes reflecting the firelight. Severus lived another 30 years. He became Bishop of Nisibis, wrote extensively on theology and scripture and pastoral care. His writings are still read and studied. He was a pillar of the church, a saint in our tradition, but he never mentioned this place again. Not once in 30 years of writing and preaching and teaching, and according to letters preserved in our library, letters to his spiritual father and closest friends, he developed a habit that troubled those who knew him. He prayed facing west, always west, away from Jerusalem, away from the rising sun, away from everything we're taught to orient ourselves toward. When asked why, he would only say that God knew where he was and what he meant, and sometimes the direction you face matters less than what you're turning away from. The fire crackled. No one spoke. I thought about a 4th century monk so disturbed by what he'd learned that he spent 3 decades praying in the wrong direction. I thought about bells rung during eclipses to warn something that wasn't human. I thought about dogs that looked through solid stone to something beyond. I thought about 4,000 years of people maintaining an alignment they might not have even understood. Generation after generation keeping faith with a duty whose purpose had been forgotten but whose urgency remained. On the 7th day of excavation, Owen's ground-penetrating radar picked up an anomaly beneath the apse, the eastern end of the church where the altar would have stood. After careful consultation with the ministry and lengthy discussions about whether we should proceed, we received permission to investigate further. The decision wasn't easy. Father Grigor argued for leaving it alone, for respecting whatever our ancestors had chosen not to excavate. But scientific curiosity won out, as it often does, and I wonder now if that was wisdom or hubris. The workers uncovered it just after dawn, their careful excavation revealing a stone staircase descending into the earth at a steep angle. The steps were carved directly from the bedrock, not built from quarried stones, each one emerging from the living rock of the plateau itself, as if someone had simply removed everything that wasn't staircase. I counted them as we prepared to descend. 23 steps, each one precisely cut to the same height and depth, the kind of mathematical regularity that speaks of ceremony or significance, rather than mere function. The air changed as we descended. It grew colder, yes, but that wasn't the disturbing part. Underground spaces are always cool, insulated from the sun's warmth by meters of stone and earth. This was different. The cold felt old, ancient, like something that had been waiting in darkness since before the world learned warmth. It was dry and still and somehow expectant, as if the space itself was holding its breath. Our footsteps echoed strangely, the sound bouncing back wrong, taking too long to fade, as if the chamber below was both larger and smaller than it should be. At the bottom, we found ourselves in a circular chamber, approximately 5 meters in diameter. The walls were smooth, almost polished, though I searched every centimeter and could find no tool marks, no evidence of how this perfection had been achieved. The ceiling was a perfect dome, mathematically precise, each point equidistant from the center. At the chamber's center was a shallow basin carved into the floor, roughly 1 meter across and perhaps 10 centimeters deep. Around the basin's rim ran a continuous line of text in a script none of us recognized. Characters that looked somehow older than writing should look, more pictographic than alphabetic. "Layla," I called up the stairs, my voice sounding flat and dead in the strange acoustics. "Bring your equipment. All of it." While we waited for her to descend, I examined the chamber more carefully. The geometry was perfect, too perfect for Bronze Age construction techniques. The walls curved in a precise hemisphere. The basin was a perfect circle, the angles all exactly what they should be. I thought of the stones above, the precision of their cutting, the deliberation of their placement across 4,000 years. This wasn't built, it was excavated. Someone had carved this chamber from the solid rock of the plateau, with tools and techniques we barely understood. Layla descended the stairs carefully, carrying her theodolite and laser level, her laptop bag over her shoulder. She worked in silence, setting up the theodolite in the basin, sighting through the stairway toward the church entrance far above. After several minutes of careful adjustment and calculation, she spoke. "Perfect alignment. Standing here and looking up, you'd be looking directly out the northwest entrance. The sightline is exact. Whoever carved this chamber knew exactly what they were doing. This isn't approximate. This isn't close enough. This is architectural precision that rivals anything we can do with modern surveying equipment." Father Grigor had remained on the stairs, neither fully in the chamber nor outside it, as if unwilling to cross some threshold that he could sense but not see. He knelt beside the basin, studying the text around its rim with a jeweler's loupe, his lips moving silently as he tried to decipher the characters. This is older than the Syriac inscription above, much older. This is from before alphabets, before the invention of writing, as we understand it. Yusuf arrived an hour later, summoned by radio from the camp where he'd been cataloguing pottery fragments. He descended the stairs slowly, pausing at the bottom to take in the chamber with wide eyes. For a long time he said nothing, just stood there breathing the strange cold air and turning slowly to see everything. Then he knelt beside the basin and began his examination. He spent a long time with the text, taking photographs from every conceivable angle, comparing it to references he pulled up on his tablet, consulting databases of ancient scripts and proto-writing systems. The sun had moved significantly across the sky above before he finally spoke. "Proto-Canaanite," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "circa 2000 BC, contemporary with the Bronze Age stones in the foundation. This is remarkable. This is perhaps the oldest known continuous inscription in this region. It predates the Phoenician alphabet by 500 years. He paused, checking his notes compulsively, as if hoping he'd made a mistake. "The translation is fragmentary. The script is damaged in places, and honestly, my Proto-Canaanite is mostly theoretical, but I can make out several phrases." He pointed to various sections as he spoke, his finger trembling slightly. "Here. Here we turn our faces from the eye. Here we stand between the above and the below. And this final section, the grammar is strange, but I think it says, here we watch for the opening." "The opening," Layla repeated softly, her voice echoing strangely in the dome chamber. "That's what the Sumerian texts called it. The eye of the abyss. The opening. Different words, same concept, same fear." Owen had been examining the walls with a portable, ground-penetrating radar unit, moving it slowly around the perimeter of the chamber, watching the screen as pulses of electromagnetic energy penetrated the stone and bounced back. "There's something else," he said, not looking up from the screen. "The GPR is picking up an anomaly beneath this chamber. There's a void 12 meters down, geometric in shape, too regular to be a natural cave or void. It appears to be a vertical shaft." "How large?" Father Grigor asked, his voice tight with something that might have been fear. 2 meters in diameter, roughly circular. It descends at least 50 meters before the signal becomes too diffuse to read clearly. Deeper, could go all the way to bedrock or beyond. There's no way to tell without excavating, and I strongly recommend we don't. Owen looked up at us, his face pale in the LED light of his equipment. Whatever this is, whoever made it, put this chamber directly above it. The basin is positioned exactly over the shaft. The alignment runs from the church entrance down the stairs, through this chamber, through the basin, and down into whatever is below. I looked at the basin, at the perfect alignment, at the ancient text warning about an opening. The scientific part of my mind wanted to know more, wanted to excavate that shaft, wanted to understand what our ancestors had been so careful to mark and maintain and orient. But another part, something deeper and older, was screaming at me to leave it alone. We should excavate it, I heard myself say, the words coming out before I'd fully thought them through. We have the equipment, the permits, the expertise. We could lower a camera, take soil samples, understand what's down there. No, Father Grigor's voice cut through the chamber like a blade. Absolutely not. We all turned to look at him. The priest had stood up, his face pale but set with determination. Severus knew something. The people who built this knew something. Every generation that maintained this site for 4,000 years knew something, and they all made the same choice. To preserve it, not to explore it. To watch, not to open. To maintain the alignment without ever looking directly at what the alignment points toward. His voice rose slightly, echoing in the dome. We are not smarter than 4,000 years of human wisdom. We are not more enlightened. We are simply more arrogant, more convinced that understanding is always better than mystery. Some things transcend our curiosity. Some knowledge is not meant to be possessed, only guarded. The argument might have continued, but Layla interrupted, her voice sharp with urgency. The alignment is coming. In 4 days, November 15th, Thuban will rise at the exact azimuth of this sight line at 3:42 in the morning. She looked at each of us in turn. This happens every 11.7 years due to orbital mechanics and precession. If we want to observe what happens, if we want to understand what our ancestors were watching for, this is our chance. The next opportunity won't come for another 12 years. Ace was already pulling out her phone, fingers flying across the screen. I can check seismic records. If this alignment has physical effects, there should be evidence. She worked in silence for several minutes, her frown deepening as she scrolled through databases and reports. Finally, she looked up, her face troubled. 11.7 years ago, November 15th, at 3:42 in the morning. Magnitude 4.1 earthquake, epicenter 2.3 kilometers from this site. That's not unusual, Owen said, though his voice lacked conviction. This is a seismically active region. Small earthquakes happen all the time. Look at the waveform, Ace said, holding out her phone. We crowded around the small screen. I'm not a seismologist, but even I could see something was wrong. Most earthquake waveforms are chaotic, jagged lines showing the random release of tectonic energy as rock breaks and slips. This one was different. It showed a single sustained tremor lasting exactly 43 seconds. The waveform, almost sinusoidal, regular and repetitive like the output of a machine. It's almost resonant, Layla said quietly, zooming in on the image. Like a struck bell. Like something was vibrating at a specific frequency, resonating with the bedrock. No one slept well that night. I lay in my tent, listening to the wind across the plateau, thinking about 4,000 years of people maintaining this site. Thinking about Severus, unable to pray facing east for 30 years. Thinking about bells rung during eclipses to warn something that wasn't human. Thinking about crosses that wouldn't stay straight and dogs that looked through stone. Thinking about an opening and what might open and what might be on the other side. Sleep, when it came, was troubled by dreams I couldn't quite remember, but that left me gasping awake in the darkness, my heart racing with a fear I couldn't name. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation and growing dread. Layla set up her equipment in the chamber with the thoroughness of someone preparing for the most important observation of her career. Cameras on tripods positioned to capture every angle, seismographs to measure any ground motion, magnetometers to detect changes in the local magnetic field, even an infrasound detector, a specialized piece of equipment designed to measure sound frequencies below the threshold of human hearing, the deep vibrations that can make you feel uneasy without knowing why. We debated whether to be in the chamber when the alignment occurred, the arguments going back and forth for hours. Father Grigor advocated for observation from above, from a safe distance, maintaining that we shouldn't put ourselves directly in the path of whatever was about to happen. Owen agreed with him, citing basic safety protocols, but Layla and I argued for direct observation. We were scientists. We needed to witness directly, not rely on remote instruments that might fail or misrecord. In the end, we compromised. We would be in the chamber, but we would maintain the option to retreat up the stairs if anything dangerous manifested. Turkish authorities had posted a security officer at the site, a requirement for overnight work. His name was Mehmet, a young man perhaps 25 years old who seemed bemused by our intensity and our obvious tension. He'd done security for archaeological sites before, he told us, mostly making sure nobody stole artifacts or vandalized ancient walls. This was different though. Even he could feel it. The site had a weight to it, an atmosphere that pressed down on you the longer you stayed. Father Grigor spent those 3 days differently than the rest of us. I found him several times at the entrance of the church, standing in the doorway but not praying at the altar. Instead, he stood with his back to where the altar had been, facing northwest into the distance, his lips moving in constant prayer. "What are you doing, Father?" I asked him once, on the morning of November 14th. "Keeping watch," he said simply, not turning to look at me, "as they have kept watch for 4 millennia. As Severus learned to do, though it troubled him to the end of his days. Someone must always watch. That's what this place is for. That's what it's always been for." On the evening of November 14th, Ace returned from Midyat with more recordings, the last fruits of her research into local memory. She gathered us around the camp table as darkness fell and the temperature dropped toward freezing. "I found something in the civil records," she said, her voice subdued. "There was a church here, continuously, from at least 245 AD until 1915, when the village was destroyed during the genocide. The last priest's name was Father Samuel. He died in 1913, at 90 years old, just before the catastrophe. There are people still alive who remember stories about him." She set up her laptop and played the first recording. An elderly man, his voice wavering with age, speaking in Turkish but with frequent lapses into Aramaic phrases. "My grandfather knew Father Samuel. Everyone in the village knew him. He was ancient even then," they said, "older than anyone could remember. He would ring the bells during certain nights when there was no festival, no holy day, no reason anyone understood. My grandfather asked him once why he did it, why he woke the whole village for no apparent reason. Father Samuel said, and my grandfather never forgot these words. So it knows we are still here. So it knows we have not forgotten our duty. When my grandfather asked, what duty? Father Samuel looked at him for a long time and then said, the duty given to us before the gospel came, before the prophet spoke, before Abraham left his father's house. The duty to watch the dark, so others may live in the light. Another recording, a woman this time, her voice so old it sounded like dry leaves rustling. My mother said Father Samuel had strange habits for a priest. He prayed at odd hours, kept vigils that made no sense, according to the liturgical calendar, and he never faced east when he prayed alone. In the church during services, yes, he followed the proper forms. But when he prayed privately, in his cell, or walking in the hills, he faced west. Always west. My mother asked him about it once, being bold as young girls sometimes are. He told her that God knew where he was and what was in his heart. He was more worried about what was in the other direction, what might be watching from the other direction, what might need to be reminded that someone was watching back. The recordings painted a picture of a man haunted by knowledge, carrying a burden he couldn't share but couldn't abandon. Father Samuel, the last keeper of a tradition that stretched back beyond memory, maintaining a vigil whose purpose had been half forgotten but whose urgency remained absolute. He died in 1913, 2 years before the genocide that would destroy the village and scatter its people. I wondered if he'd known what was coming, if he'd seen the future in the same strange way he'd seen the past. I wondered who took up the watch after he was gone, or if the watch had finally ended with his death. That night, our last before the alignment, none of us could eat much dinner. The tension was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. We sat around the camp table picking at food that might as well have been cardboard, drinking tea that had gone cold in our cups, not talking much because what was there to say? We were about to observe something that people had been watching for 4,000 years, something that made ancient cultures carve warnings in stone, something that troubled a 4th century monk enough that he spent 30 years praying in the wrong direction. Sleep seemed impossible, but we went to our tents early anyway, lying in the darkness and listening to the wind and the strange sounds the plateau made at night, sounds that might have been natural or might have been something else. I must have dozed eventually because I woke with a start to find Layla shaking my shoulder. "It's time," she said. 2:30, we need to get into position. I dressed quickly, pulling on layers against the bitter cold, and emerged from my tent to find everyone else already awake and moving. Father Grigor stood by the church entrance, a dark shape against the starlight, still keeping his vigil. Mehmet was making coffee on a camp stove, his hands shaking slightly though, whether from cold or nerves, I couldn't tell. We descended into the chamber at 3 a.m, an hour before the alignment. The stairs felt different at night, darker and steeper, as if the earth itself was trying to discourage our descent. The air grew colder with each step, that same dry ancient cold that felt like it had been waiting since before the sun first warmed the earth. Our headlamps created crazy dancing shadows on the walls, making the perfect geometry of the chamber seem somehow alive and watchful. At the bottom, Layla's equipment hummed softly, all recording devices active and ready, green lights blinking like small, patient eyes. I positioned myself at the edge of the basin, my back against the curved wall. Layla stood opposite me, monitoring her instruments with the focus of someone whose entire career had led to this moment. Owen and Yusuf flanked the chamber at 90-degree intervals, forming a cross with Layla and me at the cardinal points. Father Grigor stood on the stairs, neither fully in the chamber nor outside it, maintaining his position at the threshold, as if he understood something about boundaries that we didn't. Ace had remained above, unwilling to enter the underground space. "My grandmother told me never to go below," she'd said earlier. "She said some things are meant to be watched from a distance, not entered. I'll keep watch up here, make sure nobody disturbs you." Mehmet stayed with her, and I was grateful for that. Whatever was about to happen, I didn't want to be responsible for exposing a young security guard to it without his informed consent. At 3:41, Layla checked her astronomical calculations one final time, her fingers flying over her laptop keyboard. "1 minute," she said, her voice tight and controlled. "Thuban will rise at 3:42 and 17 seconds. The alignment will be perfect for approximately 43 seconds before precession, and the Earth's rotation carry it past." The wait felt eternal. I found myself holding my breath without meaning to, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought everyone else must be able to hear it. The chamber was absolutely silent except for the quiet hum of equipment and our breathing, which seemed unnaturally loud in the perfect acoustics of the dome. At exactly 3:42 in the morning, Thuban rose above the horizon 15 miles to the northwest. I couldn't see it directly, we were underground in a sealed chamber, but I knew the exact moment it happened because everything changed. The change wasn't visual at first, it was felt. A sudden shift in the air pressure, or the quality of the darkness, or something I didn't have words to describe. Magnetic fluctuations, Layla said, her voice tight and controlled. Professional despite the circumstances. Significant. Temperature dropping. Fast. I felt it then, a vibration so low, it wasn't quite sound, more like a pressure wave moving through the rock itself. It resonated in my chest, my bones, made my teeth ache, and my vision blur slightly. The infrasound detector was spiking, the screen showing frequencies at the very edge of what the human body could perceive, down in the range where sound becomes almost tactile, where you feel it more than hear it. The temperature plummeted. My breath came in great plumes of white mist that hung in the air like ghosts. Layla's thermometer showed a drop of 9 degrees Celsius in 20 seconds. Impossible without some massive energy transfer, something draining heat from the air itself. The cold wasn't natural. It felt old, ancient, like the cold between stars. The cold of the void before creation. It penetrated through layers of clothing, through skin and muscle, seemed to seep into my very bones. I started shivering uncontrollably, my body trying to generate warmth against something that felt like it could freeze the sun itself. Then I saw it, and my breath caught in my throat. The starlight travelling in a perfect line down the stairs, across the chamber floor, pooling in the basin. It was faint, barely visible even in the darkness of the chamber, but unmistakable. A thin thread of light, pure and cold and somehow alive, stretching from the stars above through 23 steps and 5 meters of chamber, to settle in the carved depression like water finding its level, and where the light touched the basin, something began to happen. The stone itself seemed to respond, not glowing exactly, but becoming somehow less opaque, as if the light was penetrating deeper than light should penetrate, reaching down into the molecular structure of the rock itself. The vibration intensified, no longer just felt but heard now. A deep subsonic hum that made the air itself seem to pulse. It felt like the earth itself was trembling, though nothing visibly moved, as if reality itself was vibrating at some frequency just outside our ability to perceive. Owen made a sound, not quite a gasp, not quite a cry, something primitive and involuntary. His nose was bleeding, thin streams of red running down to his chin and dripping onto his jacket. He wiped at it absently, his eyes fixed on the basin, unable to look away even though I could see the whites of his eyes all around his pupils. Layla swayed, catching herself against the wall, one hand still gripping her laptop. "The readings," she whispered, her voice thin and strained. "This doesn't make sense. The seismograph is showing massive activity, but there's no actual movement. The magnetometer is registering fluctuations that shouldn't be possible. It's like," she paused, searching for words, "it's like the fundamental forces are being bent, twisted into configurations that shouldn't exist." Father Grigor began chanting, his voice rising above the subsonic rumble that filled the chamber. The words were Aramaic, the ancient Trisadion that predated the church itself, words that had been spoken in this region for 3,000 years. "Holy God, holy mighty, holy immortal, have mercy on us. Holy God, holy mighty, holy immortal, have mercy on us." His voice didn't waver, strong and clear despite his age, an anchor of human sound in a place that suddenly felt very inhuman. I could see his knuckles were white where he gripped the stair railing. his whole body rigid with effort or fear or prayer. The light in the basin seemed to deepen, to grow more focused and intense, almost alive in its purposefulness. It wasn't spreading like normal light should spread, diffusing and scattering. It was concentrating, becoming more coherent, more directed, like a laser or a searchlight pointing down into the stone. And then I felt it, and my world changed in a way I'm still trying to understand. The overwhelming, crushing, mind-breaking sensation that something was looking back. Not me specifically. Not any of us individually. It wasn't personal, which somehow made it infinitely worse. Through the alignment, through this perfect conjunction of stone and star and time that happened once every 12 years, something vast and old and utterly alien was turning its attention towards this precise point on Earth's surface. It wasn't malevolent, and that was perhaps the most terrifying thing about it. Malevolence I could have understood, could have processed and reacted to. This was simply awareness, simply attention, simply the act of noticing. The way you might glance at an anthill while walking past, not thinking about the ants as individuals or caring about their lives or deaths, just momentarily conscious that something small and insignificant exists in your peripheral vision. And in that moment of awful, crystalline clarity, I understood everything our ancestors had been trying to tell us. This church doesn't face away from God. It faces away so God doesn't have to see. The alignment isn't for worship. It's for watching. We're not the observers, we're the observed. Or rather, we're the barrier, standing between whatever is out there and everything we love, making sure it knows we're watching, making sure it knows we haven't forgotten, making sure it remembers that someone is always here, always vigilant, always maintaining the threshold. The basin isn't for prayer or offerings or any religious purpose I'd imagined. It's a lens or a keyhole or an eye socket, focusing the starlight down into the shaft below, down into whatever lies 50 meters beneath us in the bedrock. And something on the other side of that shaft, something ancient and patient and impossibly vast, had just noticed us noticing it. The sensation was crushing, vertiginous, like standing at the edge of a cliff and looking down into depths so profound that distance loses meaning. My knees buckled, and I would have fallen if Owen hadn't caught me, his hands iron strong despite the blood still running from his nose. I could hear myself making sounds, whimpering like a child. All my archaeological training and scientific objectivity stripped away by pure instinctive terror. This was what Severus had felt. This was why he couldn't write about it. Why he prayed facing west for 30 years. Why he begged his bishop to strike the account from the record. Some things should not be looked at directly. Some things should not know you exist. Some things should not see you seeing them. The alignment was a keyhole cut through space and time and probability, and we had just put our eye to it. But something on the other side had put its eye there too, and the contact, however brief, however mediated by stone and distance, changed something fundamental about my understanding of my place in the universe. We are small. We are so terrifyingly small, and what lies beyond the thin shell of our atmosphere and our understanding is so incomprehensibly vast that merely brushing against its awareness is enough to break something in the human mind. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. Thuban had risen higher, the Earth's rotation carrying it past the precise alignment by less than a single degree. The light faded from the basin like water draining away. The vibration ceased as if someone had flipped a switch. The temperature began to stabilize, though my body kept shivering, kept trying to generate warmth against the cold that was no longer physical. The equipment readings returned to something approaching normal. The seismograph settling back to baseline. The magnetometer calming its wild fluctuations. In the silence that followed, profound and ringing, I could hear Mehmet calling down from above, his voice high-pitched and anxious, asking if we were all right. What was that noise? Did we feel the ground shake? Should he call for help? "We're fine," I called back, though my voice shook and the words tasted like lies. My mouth was dry, my hands were trembling, and I could see that everyone else was in the same condition. We weren't fine. None of us would ever be fine again. Something had changed in that chamber. Something had shifted in the architecture of our understanding. And there was no going back to who we were 43 seconds ago. We climbed the stairs slowly, helping each other when legs grew weak or balance failed, emerging into the pre-dawn darkness like miners emerging from a collapsed shaft. Ace was waiting with blankets and hot tea, her face pale and worried in the light of the camp lanterns. "Did you feel it?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Up here, the ground shook. Just for a moment, maybe 10 or 15 seconds. Like something enormous moved beneath us. Like the earth itself shifted on its foundation. We wrapped ourselves in blankets that did nothing to warm the cold that had settled into our bones and drank tea that tasted like ashes in our mouths. We sat outside the church as dawn broke over the Turabdin plateau, watching the sun rise in the east. The proper direction, the holy direction, the direction we're supposed to face. No one spoke for a long time. We were each processing what we'd experienced, trying to fit it into frameworks that couldn't possibly contain it, trying to find words in languages that had never needed words for this. Layla was reviewing her data, scrolling through readings and recordings with shaking hands, her face pale and drawn. Owen kept wiping his nose mechanically, checking for more blood that had finally stopped flowing. Yusuf stared at the church entrance with an expression somewhere between awe and horror and understanding. Father Grigor finally broke the silence as the sun cleared the horizon. "That wasn't an astronomical phenomenon," he said quietly, his voice hoarse from chanting. "That was something responding to the alignment. Something noticing that the door had been opened, even briefly, even incompletely." Layla nodded slowly, still looking at her screen. "The equipment doesn't lie. Those magnetic fluctuations, the temperature drop, the seismic activity, none of it has a natural explanation within our current understanding of physics. It was like..." She paused, searching for words that didn't exist. Like the alignment opened a channel. Like it created a connection between here and somewhere else, somewhere that doesn't follow the same rules we do. And something on the other end noticed we'd opened it. Noticed and looked through. Or reached through, Owen said softly, touching his nose gingerly. We sat with that for a while, watching the light spread across the plateau, watching the world become ordinary again, watching the shadows retreat to their proper places. The normalcy felt like a lie now, a thin veneer over something vast and terrible that our ancestors had known about and tried to warn us about and built monuments to guard against. Finally, Yusuf spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "The inscription says here we watch for the opening. Not an opening, the opening. Like it's a specific thing, a singular event. What if it's not something that happens in the future? What if it's something that's always happening, every 12 years when the alignment occurs? What if the opening is the alignment itself?" "Then we've just witnessed it," I said. "We've just experienced what generations of people before us experienced. What they built this place to monitor and maintain and guard against." Father Grigor's answer came without hesitation. "Yes, and now we must do what they did. We must document what we've learned. We must preserve this place. We must make sure no one ever changes it. No one ever turns it around. No one ever excavates that shaft to see what lies below. And we must make sure someone is always watching, always keeping the vigil, always standing between that opening and the world that doesn't know it needs protecting." Over the next week, we completed our documentation with obsessive thoroughness. We photographed everything from every possible angle, measured everything with redundant precision, recorded everything in multiple formats and multiple copies. Layla's data was extensive and baffling, showing effects that couldn't be explained, but couldn't be denied. Proof that something had happened, even if we couldn't fully articulate what. Owen's stratigraphic analysis was meticulous, documenting 4,000 years of human effort to maintain this place exactly as it was. Yusuf's translations were as complete as they could be given the fragmentary nature of some texts, preserving words carved by people who understood things we were only beginning to glimpse. We submitted a joint report to the Turkish Ministry of Culture and Tourism, carefully worded but absolutely clear in its recommendations. Preserve the site exactly as it is. No further excavation below the chamber we'd found. No structural changes whatsoever. No alteration of the orientation under any circumstances, no matter how minor it might seem. We recommended UNESCO World Heritage status with specific provisions written directly into the designation. Legal protections that would survive changes in government or academic fashion. The ministry accepted our recommendations without argument, without negotiation, without any of the bureaucratic resistance I'd expected. Perhaps they'd read something between the lines of our report. Perhaps they had their own reasons for understanding. Perhaps the weight of 4,000 years of human conviction was enough to convince them. On my last evening at the site, I stood at the entrance of the church, looking out across the plateau towards the northwest horizon where Thuban had risen 2 weeks before. The sun was setting behind me, casting long shadows across the ancient stones, painting the limestone hills in shades of gold and amber. Ace joined me with 2 glasses of tea, the traditional farewell between people who've shared something significant. We stood in companionable silence for a while, sipping the sweet hot liquid, watching the shadows lengthen. "My grandmother was right," Ace said softly, her voice almost lost in the evening wind. "This is the house of watching." I nodded. "But what is it watching? What exactly are we guarding against?" She was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the horizon where night was beginning to gather. "I think my grandmother was wrong about one thing. She said it watches for something, as if waiting for an event to occur. But I think it watches against something. I think it's always been about standing guard, about maintaining a barrier, about making sure that whatever is out there knows we're still here, still vigilant, still refusing to look away, even though looking is the last thing we want to do." I thought about that, turning the idea over in my mind. 4,000 years of maintenance. 4,000 years of keeping this alignment, this orientation, this vigil, generation after generation, culture after culture, religion after religion, all making the same choice, all facing the same direction, all turning their backs to their gods so their gods wouldn't have to see what lies beyond. "Some vigils," I said slowly, testing the words, "began before we had words for why we were keeping them, before we had gods to pray to, or prophets to listen to, or books to write our wisdom in. Some duties are older than understanding." We stood in silence as the stars began to appear, one by one, tiny points of light in the gathering darkness. Thuban was there, faint and easily overlooked, no longer at the celestial pole, no longer the star that ancient peoples used to navigate their world and align their monuments, but still there, still rising at its appointed time, still marking something that humans had learned to turn away from long before they learned to write down why. I found myself searching for it, and when I found it, I forced myself to look away. Some things, I was beginning to understand, shouldn't be looked at directly. Some knowledge comes at too high a price. I left the next morning just after dawn, packing my equipment while the world was still quiet and cold. In my rearview mirror as I drove away, the church grew smaller against the limestone plateau, but its alignment never changed. 19.3 degrees off true east. Forever turned away. Forever watching. Forever standing guard over something our ancestors understood better than we do, even with all our science and technology and sophisticated instruments. 3 months have passed since I left Turkey. I'm back in my office at the university, writing papers and teaching classes and trying to return to normal academic life. But something changed in that chamber when the light pooled in the basin and something looked back. Something in me that can't be unchanged. I don't pray much, never have. I'm a scientist, or at least I was, but I find myself facing west when I do now. Away from the rising sun, away from Jerusalem, away from all the proper directions we're taught to orient ourselves toward. And I don't fully understand why. Can't articulate the reasoning even to myself, but it feels necessary in a way that transcends conscious decision. Father Severus understood it. He lived with it for 30 years, that knowledge that changed the direction of his prayers. Father Samuel understood it, ringing bells in the night to remind something vast and patient that was still watching. The unnamed Bronze Age astronomers who first carved that chamber understood it, leaving warnings in stone for people who wouldn't be born for 2,000 years. And now, God help me, I understand it too. Not completely, not perfectly, but enough to know that what I saw in that chamber was real, was significant, was something that matters in ways I'm still discovering. The church still stands on the Tur Abdin plateau. It will stand long after I'm gone, long after everyone who read my reports is gone, long after this entire civilization is dust and memory. Because the opening comes every 11.7 years, when a star rises at a specific point on the horizon, when stone and time and cosmic mechanics align in a way that turns a foundation into a keyhole, a lens, a connection between here and somewhere else. And someone needs to make sure that keyhole keeps facing away from everything we love. Someone needs to keep watching, not to see what's out there, but to make sure it doesn't see us. Or more accurately, to make sure it knows we see it seeing us, that we're aware and vigilant and refusing to be ignored or forgotten. I've been having dreams. Nothing concrete, nothing I can remember clearly when I wake up gasping in the darkness. Just sensations. The feeling of being very small in a very large space. The sense that something vast is slowly turning its attention toward us, toward Earth, toward this particular moment in cosmic time. The conviction that our ancestors weren't primitive or superstitious, that they understood things we've forgotten in our rush to explain everything, to quantify everything, to reduce mystery to mechanism. They knew about the opening. They built monuments to mark it, and warn about it, and guard against it. And they passed that knowledge down through generations, in stories and rituals and architectural alignments, in prayers facing the wrong direction, and bells rung during eclipses and crosses that wouldn't stay straight. Layla calls me sometimes late at night when she can't sleep. We don't talk about what happened. We don't need to. We both know what we saw, what we felt, what we can never unknow. Owen sends emails occasionally, checking in, making sure I'm okay, though neither of us is okay, and we both know it. Father Grigor wrote me a letter, an actual physical letter on paper, in careful English script. He told me that Mor Gabriel is keeping records of our findings, adding them to their library of dangerous knowledge, preserving them for future generations who might need to understand. He told me he prays for me, and I believe him, and I'm grateful for it, even though I'm not sure what I believe anymore. The nightmares are getting worse, not more frequent, but more intense, more specific. Last night I dreamed I was standing in the chamber, alone, and the light was there, but it was wrong. It wasn't starlight. It was something else, something that moved against the natural flow of causality, something that existed before light was created. And And in that wrong light, I saw the shaft beneath the basin, saw down into depths that shouldn't exist, saw things that shouldn't be possible, geometries that violated every law of physics I'd ever learned. I saw what lies beneath. I saw what the opening opens onto. I woke up screaming, tangled in sweat-soaked sheets, my wife shaking me and asking what's wrong. What did I see? But I can't tell her. How do you explain that we're not alone, that we've never been alone, that there are things older than the earth looking down at us from places we can't even properly conceptualize? How do you explain that our ancestors built walls not to keep things out, but to make sure certain things stayed in, or rather stayed there, stayed beyond, stayed on the other side of whatever boundary the alignment marks? I've started making arrangements, nothing dramatic, nothing that would alarm anyone, just quiet preparations. I'm endowing a research position at the university, a postdoctoral fellowship specifically for monitoring the site. I'm establishing a fund to maintain the structure, to pay for security, to ensure that someone is always watching. I'm writing letters to colleagues I trust, explaining what we found and what we learned and what needs to be done. I'm creating redundancies, backup plans, ensuring that even if I'm gone, even if this generation of scholars is gone, someone will remember, and someone will watch, and someone will keep the vigil. The church faces away from God because God, in his infinite wisdom, has turned his face from what lies beyond. And we, the watchers, we who inherit this duty from ancestors, will never know. We stand in between, not to see, not to understand, not to interact or communicate or bridge the gap between here and there. Just to watch, just to stand guard, just to make sure that once every 12 years, when the alignment occurs and the opening opens and something vast briefly touches our reality, we're there to witness it and record it and remember it. Not to warn it away. We're far too small for that, but to remind it that we're watching, that we see it, that we haven't forgotten our duty, even though we've mostly forgotten what the duty is or why it matters. That humanity, small and brief and fragile as we are, still stands guard on this particular patch of limestone in southeastern Turkey, still maintains this alignment, still keeps this vigil that began before we invented writing or agriculture or civilization itself. The church still stands, 19.3 degrees off true east, forever turned away, forever watching. And I pray when I remember to pray, facing west, away from the light, away from salvation, toward whatever darkness our ancestors tried so desperately to warn us about. Because someone has to. Because the duty was given before the gospel came, and it will continue until the gospel is fulfilled, or the world ends, or something else happens that I can't even imagine. And in 10 years and 4 months, when the alignment comes again, someone will be there. Someone will descend those 23 steps. Someone will stand in that perfect circular chamber and watch the starlight pool in the basin and feel the attention of something vast and alien turn toward them for 43 seconds. Someone will keep the vigil. Someone will watch the opening. It won't be me. I can't go back. What I saw in that chamber, what I felt when that thing looked through the alignment and noticed us noticing it, broke something in me that won't heal. But I'll make sure someone goes. I'll make sure the tradition continues, the duty is maintained, the watch is kept. Because 4,000 years of human wisdom can't be wrong. And if they are, if this is all superstition and coincidence and pareidolia, well, I'd rather stand watch over nothing than fail to guard against something. The church faces away. We face away. And whatever lies beyond, whatever the opening opens onto, it knows we're watching. It knows we remember. It knows that humanity, despite everything, despite our brief lives and limited understanding and terrible fragility, refuses to look away. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's all it's ever been. Maybe the vigil is its own purpose, its own justification, its own reward. Maybe standing guard is what makes us human, what connects us to ancestors who died 4,000 years ago and descendants who won't be born for 4,000 years hence. I pray facing west. I watch the horizon. I wait for the next alignment, 10 years distant, and I make my preparations. The church stands, the watch continues, the duty remains. And I, God help me, I understand why. Welcome back to Void of Fears. Before we jump into today's story, I've got a couple quick things. First, if you could smash that like button, drop a comment below, and hit subscribe if you haven't already. It seriously makes a huge difference. The YouTube algorithm loves that stuff and pushes my videos to new viewers. Secondly, I just launched the Void of Fears podcast on Spotify. Same stories, ad-free, and you can listen with your screen off. Links in the description. I really appreciate every single one of you who takes the time to support the channel. It means the world to me and helps keep it growing. Alright, enough of me rambling. Let's dive into today's story. He'd been alone in the Deep Space Communications Center for 6 hours, watching telemetry scroll past from 43 colonies, scattered across a dozen star systems. Most nights the work lulled him into a trance, confirming that distant human outposts were still breathing, still alive in the cosmic dark. The coffee had gone cold in his thermos hours ago. His eyes burned from staring at screens. He was considering whether to brew a fresh pot when his primary monitor flashed red. Colony Orison Lambda, Kepler 442 system, silent for 6 months, until now. Caleb's fingers moved across the interface, isolating the transmission. The waveform looked wrong immediately. Too smooth, too continuous, lacking the jagged peaks and valleys of normal deep space communication. Standard protocols used packet-based messaging to handle the 47-minute communication delay inherent in interstellar distances. This signal ignored all of that. It was organic, flowing like a river, almost like a heartbeat. He initiated playback, and the sound that emerged from his speakers made his blood run cold. 247 voices spoke in perfect unison. Colony Orison Lambda, reporting status update, all personnel accounted for, mission parameters exceeded, requesting no intervention. Caleb's hand froze over the pause button. The synchronization was impossible. He'd heard group recitations before, seen trained choirs, listened to crowds chanting slogans. There were always variations. Microsecond delays, individual inflections, someone slightly off tempo or flat. Human coordination was imperfect by nature. This had none of that. The voices layered like harmonics in a musical chord, but the timing was absolutely identical, down to the breath patterns, down to the subtle vocal inflections, like a single consciousness speaking through multiple mouths. He ran speech analysis software, isolating individual voice signatures. The system churned through the audio for several minutes before displaying results. It had identified all 247 colonists who departed Earth 3 years ago. Every single person on the manifest was present in this transmission, including Dr. Lena Russo, the chief cartographer, the woman who died in a mining accident 14 months ago, whose death certificate Caleb had processed himself, whose funeral he'd watched via live stream because her family had requested a public memorial. His hands started shaking. He expanded the analysis, running deeper scans of the transmission structure. Buried beneath the spoken words, he found something that made his chest tighten, a low-frequency pulse embedded in the carrier wave. The oscillation ran between 0.5 and 4 Hz, delta waves, the exact frequency range the human brain produces during deep sleep and unconscious processing. Someone had encoded brainwave patterns into an interstellar transmission. Then he saw the header metadata and felt his stomach drop. The transmission wasn't addressed to Earth Station Meridian or the Deep Space Communications Center or even the Space Administration headquarters. It was addressed to him, personally. To Calum Michael Vore, using the middle name he'd been given after his grandfather, the name he'd never told anyone at work, never put in any official documentation because he'd always hated it. They knew who he was, they knew his full name, and they'd sent this message specifically to him. Calum stared at the header for a long moment, his mind racing through possibilities. Security breach? Database hack? Impossible coincidence? None of it made sense. The colony had been silent for 6 months. No communication, no emergency beacons, no indication of survival. They'd been declared lost contact 3 months ago, and a recovery mission was already in early planning stages. So why were they transmitting now? And how did they know his name? He saved the transmission to an encrypted drive, backed it up twice, and escalated to his supervisor immediately. Within 2 hours, the night shift supervisor had roused the mission director from sleep. Within 6 hours, the senior leadership of the Space Administration was listening to the recording in a secure conference room. Within 72 hours, a recovery ship was being fueled and stocked for launch. The crew selection happened faster than Calum had ever seen. Commander Torrin Pike, a veteran of 4 deep space missions, with a reputation for staying calm in impossible situations. Iskra Halevi, a cartographer who specialized in subsurface geology and had helped map cave systems on 3 different planetary bodies. Nix Calderon, a neural system specialist whose job was monitoring crew cognitive stability during long-duration spaceflight. And Calum himself, because whatever was happening at Horizon Lambda involved communication, and he was the only person who'd fully analysed that transmission. Calum had argued against his own inclusion. He was an analyst, not an explorer. He worked with signals and codes, not field operations. But the mission director had been firm. They needed someone who understood what they were looking for. Someone who could analyse communications in real time if the colony made contact again. "You found the anomaly," Director Hassan had said. "You're going to help us understand it." The ship was called Meridian's Hope, a mid-size recovery vessel designed for missions lasting up to 18 months. Calum thought the name sounded less like confidence and more like a prayer. They launched on a cold morning in October, the ship rising through layers of atmosphere until Earth became a blue marble against black infinity. Calum watched through the observation window as his home planet shrank to a point of light, then vanished entirely as they engaged the faster-than-light drive that would carry them across the cosmic distances to Kepler 442. The voyage would take 6 months. 6 months in a ship barely larger than a luxury apartment, with 3 people he'd met only days before. 6 months to think, about 247 voices speaking in perfect unison. 6 months to wonder what they'd find when they arrived. During the first 8 weeks, the routine felt almost normal. Torrin ran the ship with quiet efficiency, performing daily systems checks, monitoring fuel consumption, adjusting their trajectory to account for gravitational influences they encountered. He had a methodical quality that Calum found reassuring, the kind of person who made decisions based on data rather than instinct. Iskra spent most of her time reviewing the planetary surveys of Kepler 442b, cross-referencing geological formations with the colony's expansion plans. She had a habit of muttering to herself while she worked, thinking out loud in a mixture of English and Hebrew that Calum found oddly comforting. Sometimes she'd pull up 3-dimensional terrain maps and rotate them slowly, studying the topology like someone reading a novel. Nix administered their weekly psychological evaluations with a gentle professionalism that made the invasive neural scans almost pleasant. She had a warm laugh and an easy manner that helped offset the clinical nature of her work. Every 7 days, they'd each spend an hour in the medical bay, while she ran cognitive assessments, checking for signs of stress or deterioration. Calum continued analysing the transmission during his off hours, and the more he studied it, the less sense it made. He'd worked with deep space communications for 8 years, processed thousands of transmissions from dozens of colonies. He knew the signatures, the protocols, the way signals degraded over interstellar distances. This transmission broke every rule he knew. Each time he played it back, he found new layers, harmonic frequencies that hadn't been present in previous playbacks, subtle variations in the background that sounded almost like breathing, or maybe distant footsteps, or perhaps the whisper of wind through empty corridors. The transmission wasn't static, it was alive, responsive, growing. He started keeping detailed logs of each playback, documenting the changes. Playback 7 revealed a secondary harmonic at 7.83 Hz, the Schumann resonance, Earth's natural electromagnetic frequency. Playback 12 showed tertiary frequencies that matched human heartbeat variability. Playback 18 contained what sounded like distant singing, though he couldn't make out words. The signal was teaching him something, showing him something, but he couldn't figure out what. In week 8, during a routine evaluation, Nix called an unscheduled crew meeting. Her expression was troubled as she pulled up brain activity scans on the main display. "I need to show you something," she said, arranging 4 sets of EEG readings on screen, color-coded for each crew member. "These are from our weekly neural monitoring sessions. Standard protocol requires me to track any unusual patterns that might indicate psychological stress or deterioration during long-term spaceflight." The 4 sets of brainwave patterns appeared on screen, overlapping each other in a complex dance of peaks and valleys. "Notice anything?" Nix asked. Torren leaned forward, studying the data with the same methodical focus he applied to everything. "The wave patterns are similar. More similar than I'd expect." "Not just similar," Nix said quietly. "Synchronized. Your gamma wave activity, neural oscillations associated with attention, consciousness, and cognitive processing, are showing unprecedented coherence. When we eat meals together, your brain waves align. When we have conversations, the synchronization intensifies. When you sleep, even in separate quarters, your delta waves match rhythms." Iskra frowned. "I've read about this. Inter-brain synchronization. It happens during social interaction, right? When people are engaged with each other." "Exactly," Nix confirmed. "It's a documented phenomenon. When 2 people have a meaningful conversation, their brain waves start to sync up. It's associated with empathy, cooperation, social bonding. Musicians playing together show it. Couples in long-term relationships show it. But this level of coherence usually only appears in very specific contexts. Deep emotional connection, synchronized physical activity, moments of intense shared focus." She highlighted sections of the scans. "You're showing it during routine activities, during breakfast, during equipment checks, during individual work sessions when you're not even in the same room. And it's been intensifying steadily since week 3. "Could it be environmental?" Torren asked. "Electromagnetic interference from the drive system? Something about the ship's shielding?" "I've ruled that out," Nix said. "I've tested every system, checked for radiation leaks, analysed the ship's electromagnetic profile. The synchronization only appears in relation to crew interaction. It's not the ship, it's us." Calum felt a chill run through him. The transmission from Orison Lambda, the voices speaking in unison. What if that's not coordination or practice? What if it's this? Neural synchronization taken to an extreme. Nix's expression was grave. "I've been thinking the same thing. If the colonists experienced progressive interbrain synchronization over an extended period, eventually their neural activity could become so aligned that they literally share cognitive processes in real time. They wouldn't just be finishing each other's sentences or knowing what someone else was thinking. They'd be experiencing identical neural states, identical thoughts, identical consciousness." "But that would require constant proximity," Iskra said. The colony was spread across several square kilometers. Different facilities, different work schedules, people sleeping in separate habitats. How could their brainwaves synchronize on that scale? Nobody had an answer. The science didn't support it. Interbrain synchronization required proximity, required interaction. It faded when people separated. The colonists at Horizon Lambda couldn't maintain that level of neural coherence unless they were literally standing next to each other every moment of every day. Could they? That night, Calum had the first dream. He was walking through the colony on Horizon Lambda, though he had never seen it except in photographs and official video reports. The domed structures were exactly as documented. The residential modules with their curved, transparent ceilings, the central plaza with its engineered gardens, the research facilities with their gleaming solar panels. But something was different. The colonists were there, all 247 of them, moving in slow spiral patterns around a massive pit in the ground. They weren't speaking, weren't communicating in any conventional sense, but Calum could hear them anyway. A chorus of thoughts and emotions and sensations washing over him like waves against the shore. "We understand now," they were saying without words. "We understand what we're meant to become." The dream had a weight to it, a texture that felt more real than most waking experiences. He could feel the temperature of the air, slightly cooler than Earth normal. He could smell the cultivated plants in the garden beds, a mixture of basil and mint and something floral he couldn't identify. He could hear the hum of atmospheric processes in the background, maintaining breathable air inside the domed enclosures. When Calum woke, his sheets were soaked with sweat. He checked the time, 3:33 in the morning, ship time. He lay there for a long moment, staring at the ceiling of his small quarters, trying to shake the lingering sensation of the dream. It had felt so real, so immediate. He pulled up his personal log and began recording, keeping his voice low so as not to wake the others. Personal log, Calum Vor, week 8, day 3. I had a dream about the colony. Vivid enough that I need to document it. Everyone was walking in spiral patterns around a pit in the ground. But here's what bothers me. I've never seen detailed surface imagery of the colony site beyond the official architectural plans and promotional videos from the initial landing. I don't have access to high-resolution photographs showing individual colonists or specific locations. So how did my brain generate those specific details? How did I know what the place actually looks like? How did I recognize faces of people I've only seen in personnel files? He paused the recording, listening to the ambient sounds of the ship, the gentle hum of life support, the occasional creak of metal adjusting to temperature fluctuations, the distant whisper of the drive system. And why does it feel like the dream is still happening, even though I'm awake? Over the next 8 weeks, the dreams intensified. All 4 crew members reported them during Nix's evaluations. Always the same imagery, the colonists walking in spirals, marking paths with glowing stones, descending into darkness beneath the surface. The dreams were so vivid, so consistent, that the crew began comparing notes during meals, discovering that they were seeing the same scenes from different perspectives, like multiple cameras recording the same event from different angles. "I saw you in my dream last night," Iskra said one morning over breakfast. "You were standing at the edge of the pit, looking down into it. You had this expression on your face, not fear, exactly. More like recognition." Calum stared at her. "I had the same dream, but I was seeing it from inside the pit, looking up. I saw you standing at the edge." Torren set down his coffee slowly. "We need to consider the possibility that these aren't just dreams. Something is reaching out to us. Something wants us to see this. Or remember it," Nix added quietly. Iskra started cross-referencing the dream imagery with the original planetary surveys of Kepler 442b, pulling up geological data and comparing it against the locations they were seeing in their sleep. What she found made her call another emergency meeting in week 16. "The pit we keep seeing in the dreams," she said, displaying geological scans on the main screen. "It's real. The original survey team documented it during the initial planetary assessment 4 years ago. They classified it as a subsurface access point, a collapsed section of what appears to be a massive cave system beneath the colony site." The scans showed a complex network of void spaces extending deep into the planet's crust, like blood vessels running through tissue. The formations were consistent with lava tubes, volcanic caves created when molten rock flows beneath a hardened surface crust and then drains away, leaving empty tunnels behind. "These formations are everywhere in the solar system," Iskra explained, zooming in on specific sections of the scan. "We found over 3,000 potential cave openings on the Moon and Mars alone, hundreds more on various outer planet moons. They're common features on any volcanically active world. Some of the lunar lava tubes are massive, over a kilometer wide in places. They're natural formations, created by volcanic processes millions of years ago." She overlaid multiple scans, showing the progression of surveys over time. "But here's what bothers me. Look at the dimensions. The main chamber beneath the colony site measures approximately 2 kilometers wide and over 400 meters high. That's at the upper end of what we'd expect for lava tube formation, but it's not unprecedented. The problem is here." She highlighted sections of the void network, showing how they branched and connected. The original survey from 4 years ago shows this network extending roughly 6 kilometers in total length. The follow-up survey from 2 years ago, just before the colony landed, shows 8 kilometers. The most recent automated survey, conducted 6 months ago right before they went silent, shows 12 kilometers. Keelam leaned forward. "Caves don't grow, not on that timescale." "Exactly. Lava tubes are geological formations that took millions of years to develop. They don't just expand on their own, and certainly not by 4 kilometers in 2 years. Either our mapping was incomplete, which is possible, given the limitations of orbital surveys, or something else is happening. Or the caves are growing," Nyx finished quietly. "That's not possible," Torrin said firmly. "There's no geological process that would cause that kind of expansion. No volcanic activity in that region, no tectonic movement, no water erosion. The planet is geologically stable." Iskra nodded. "I know. That's what makes this disturbing, because I've checked and rechecked the survey data. The measurements are accurate. The methodology is sound. If the data is correct, and I believe it is, then those caves are expanding at a rate that shouldn't be possible." Calum had been keeping a file private, but now he pulled it up and displayed it on screen. "There's something else. I found Dr. Lena Russo's final survey logs buried in the colony's backup data. She was the lead cartographer, the one who died in a mining accident. She was documenting anomalies in the subsurface readings 3 weeks before her death." He displayed a series of log entries, dated and time-stamped. Week 10, Day 4. Magnetic anomalies detected beneath colony site consistent with large void networks. Initial readings suggest hollow spaces at depths of 400 to 800 meters. Recommend detailed subsurface mapping to assess structural stability for future expansion. Week 11, Day 2. Anomaly in survey readings. South Tunnel Complex now reading 400 meters east of yesterday's position. Rechecking instruments for calibration errors. We'll run diagnostic on survey equipment and rescan tomorrow. Week 11, Day 6. Instruments are functioning correctly. Diagnostics show no calibration errors, no hardware malfunctions. Ran 3 separate scans using different equipment. Results consistent. The subsurface voids are moving. I know how this sounds. I've triple-checked everything. Either our fundamental understanding of geology is wrong, or something down there is aware of us. Week 12, Day 1. The ground rearranged itself when we named it. I've been tracking this for 3 days now. Every time we assign coordinates to a void space, every time we label a tunnel or chamber in our mapping software, the formation shifts. It's like it's responding to observation, to classification, to being known. I'm requesting immediate geological assessment from Earth. This is beyond my expertise. That was her final entry. 2 days later, the accident report documented that Dr. Lena Russo had fallen into an unmapped shaft during a solo survey expedition in the northern sector. Search teams spent 48 hours trying to recover her body. But the shaft was too deep, too unstable. The opening collapsed during the rescue attempt. Her body was never recovered. She was trying to warn them, Calum said quietly. She knew something was wrong, but nobody listened, or nobody understood what she was really saying. The crew sat in silence for a long moment, considering the implications. Caves that moved, geological formations that responded to being observed. A scientist who died trying to map something that didn't want to be mapped. There's one more thing, Iskra said hesitantly. I pulled up the accident report, read the witness statements from the search team. They described the shaft Russo fell into as appearing overnight in a location they'd surveyed just days before. They thought it was a natural collapse that the ground had given way. But what if it wasn't collapse? What if it was opening? What if something beneath the surface was creating access points? Access points for what? Torrin asked. Nobody answered. They spent the rest of the voyage preparing for scenarios they couldn't fully imagine. Torrin drilled them on emergency protocols, evacuation procedures, defensive tactics. Iskra mapped approach vectors and identified potential landing sites, searching for areas with stable geology away from the known cave networks. Nyx continued monitoring their neural activity, watching the synchronization patterns grow stronger despite her interventions. By week 24, they could finish each other's sentences without conscious effort. By week 25, they sometimes spoke in unison, without meaning to, their words overlapping perfectly. By week 26, when they finally entered orbit around Kepler 442b, they had stopped being entirely separate people, in any meaningful sense. The change had been gradual enough that none of them had noticed when they crossed the threshold. But looking back, Calum could identify the moment when I had started becoming we in his internal monologue. Week 19, day 4. During a conversation about music with Iskra, he'd thought her thoughts before she spoke them, not predicted them, experienced them. For just a moment, he'd known what she was about to say with the same certainty he knew his own intentions, because her intention had been present in his mind, as if it were his own. The sensation had been startling, then comforting, then normal. Now, entering orbit around Kepler 442b, Calum realized he could feel his crewmates' emotions as ambient sensations in his consciousness. Torrin's focused determination, Iskra's nervous excitement, Nyx's clinical curiosity mixed with deep concern. The feelings weren't his own, but they weren't entirely separate either. They existed in his awareness like background music, always present, always accessible. The planet hung below them like a promise and a threat. Kepler 442b was an Earth analog world, slightly larger than home, slightly warmer on average, with extensive oceans and 2 modest continents. The colony had been established on the equatorial region of the larger landmass, nestled in a valley between ancient volcanic mountains that had gone dormant millions of years before humans existed. Orbital scans confirmed what they'd feared and expected. The colony infrastructure was intact, maintained, functional. Solar arrays gleamed in the afternoon sun, their panels clean and properly aligned. Greenhouse domes showed healthy plant growth, vibrant green visible even from orbit. Atmospheric processes hummed along, maintaining breathable air inside the enclosed habitats. Water recycling systems operated normally. Power generation was stable. Everything looked perfect. Everything looked maintained. Everything looked exactly as it should for a thriving colony of 247 people. But no one responded to their hails. Torren tried every frequency, every protocol, standard communication channels, emergency bands, personal comm units. He broadcast identification codes, authentication sequences, requested status updates. Nothing. Just silence, vast and complete, broken only by the automated systems reporting their operational status. Life support is active, Nix observed, studying the telemetry. Atmospheric processors are maintaining air pressure and oxygen levels for a full population. Food synthesizers show recent usage. Water consumption is consistent with 200 plus inhabitants. But there's no communication traffic, no personal devices pinging the network, no security cameras transmitting footage. Iskra ran detailed scans of the subsurface geology, and what appeared on her screen made her breath catch. The void network has expanded dramatically since the last survey. The cave systems now extend beneath the entire colony footprint, forming these intricate interlocking chambers. Look at the pattern. She highlighted the structure, rotating it in 3 dimensions. The chambers connected in ways that seemed almost deliberate, almost designed. They branched and merged in fractal patterns, creating a vast underground architecture that bore an unsettling resemblance to neural networks. There, she said suddenly, pointing to a specific reading. Do you see that? The subsurface voids are emitting some kind of signal. Low-frequency electromagnetic pulses. Let me isolate the frequency. She ran the analysis and the result appeared on screen. 0.5 to 4 hertz. Delta waves, Nix whispered. The caves are broadcasting the same frequency pattern that was embedded in the transmission Calum received. That shouldn't be possible. Delta waves are neural oscillations. They're biological phenomena produced by living brains, not geological formations. Unless the caves aren't just geological, Calum said, echoing the thought that had been growing in all their minds. Torren made the decision quickly, as he always did when faced with impossible situations. We're going down, standard landing protocols. We go in armed, we stay together as a unit, and at the first sign of immediate danger, we evacuate. Our primary objective is to locate survivors and determine what happened. Secondary objective is to secure any recoverable data. Understood? They all nodded, the gesture synchronized without conscious coordination. They landed at 1:22 in the afternoon, local time, the ship settling gently onto the designated landing pad at the edge of the main colony plaza. The pad showed signs of recent maintenance, cleared of dust, structurally sound, guidance markers still functioning. Someone had been taking care of this place. But when they unsealed the airlock and stepped out into the Kepler 442b afternoon, they found themselves in a ghost town. The plaza was empty but immaculate. Someone had swept the paths recently. The paving stones were clean, free of the dust and debris that should have accumulated over 6 months of abandonment. Garden beds showed evidence of recent watering, the soil still slightly damp, the plants healthy and thriving. Maintenance tools lay in neat rows outside the engineering dome, organized by size and function. Everything was perfect. Everything was cared for. But there was no one there. The crew split up to cover more ground, staying in constant communication, searching the residential modules first. Every habitat told the same story. Interrupted lives, frozen in mid-motion like everyone had simply vanished in the middle of ordinary activities. In one unit, Calum found a meal still on the table. Some kind of synthesized protein with vegetables, now partially decayed, but still recognizable. 2 plates, 2 chairs, as if someone had been in the middle of lunch when they stopped. The utensils lay crossed on one plate, the other showed food half-eaten. In another habitat, Iskra found clothing folded neatly on a bed, as if someone had been in the process of packing or organizing. Personal logs sat open on desks. In some units, screens still displayed the last thing their inhabitants had been viewing. Geological surveys, personal messages, entertainment programs frozen mid-playback. There was no violence, no signs of struggle or panic, no indication of forced evacuation or emergency. Just absence, sudden and complete, as if 247 people had simultaneously decided to stop what they were doing and walk away. Calum found a physical journal in one of the units, an old-fashioned paper notebook with a worn cover. It belonged to engineer Tobias Quinn. He recognized the name from the personnel files. Quinn had been 34 years old, a propulsion specialist from New Zealand, an avid hiker who'd volunteered for colonial service because he wanted to see new worlds. The final entry was dated 6 months ago, the handwriting neat and careful. We understand the invitation now. We've been listening to the wrong frequencies, looking in the wrong places, trying to communicate with the wrong parts of ourselves. The presence has been trying to speak to us since we arrived, but we were too isolated to hear it, too separated, too alone inside our individual minds. But now we're learning. Now the boundaries are dissolving. Now we're synchronizing. And for the first time in my life, I don't feel alone inside my own head. Tomorrow we descend. Not because we have to, not because we're compelled or controlled, but because we want to, because we choose to, because we're finally becoming complete. Every journal they found had similar entries, different handwriting, slightly different phrasing, but the same sentiment, same date, same sense of anticipation rather than fear. Same voluntary choice to go underground. They found the memory archive in the central data facility, a reinforced building designed to survive almost any disaster. The door was unlocked, the interior climate controlled and pristine. The system was still running, its processors humming quietly in their racks, status lights blinking in rhythmic patterns. This was where colonists uploaded neural backups, detailed scans of their brain states, comprehensive maps of their neural architecture, preserved as insurance against accidents or medical emergencies. It was standard protocol for deep space missions, a safety net in case someone suffered brain damage and needed their consciousness restored from backup. Nix accessed the system and immediately pulled back from the interface as if she'd been burned. The capacity. The system is running at 340% normal load. That shouldn't be possible. The hardware isn't rated for that level of processing. It should have shut down or crashed. Calum moved to her side, pulling up the file structure. The display showed 247 individual consciousness backups, each one labelled with a colonist's name and updated regularly according to standard protocols. Monthly uploads, compressed and encrypted, stored in redundant arrays, but woven between the individual files were additional structures that shouldn't exist. Massive web-like formations, connecting every backup to every other backup, creating a unified network out of what should have been isolated data stores. "Those are bridge architectures," Nick said, her voice shaking as she analysed the structures. Inter-brain synchronization patterns, but permanent, built into the consciousness backups themselves at the fundamental level. It's like their minds learned to reach across the gap between individual brains and form direct connections, direct neural pathways allowing thought and emotion and sensation to flow between consciousness like electrical signals through wires. She pulled up the timeline, showing how the structures had developed over the colony's 18-month operational period. The display showed a progression that made Calum's stomach turn. Months 1 through 3. Normal individual, neural patterns. Each backup showed a distinct consciousness, unique brain architecture, individual thought processes. Months 4 through 5. The first hints of synchronization appearing in the data. mild gamma-wave coherence during group activities, the kind of temporary neural alignment that happens during meaningful social interaction. Month 6. Synchronization intensifying, appearing during sleep cycles, showing up in resting state brain activity. Month 7. The bridges beginning to form, consciousness patterns actively reaching out toward each other, seeking connection. Month 8. The point of no return. The bridges had become permanent neural architecture, integrated so deeply into each consciousness that separation would cause catastrophic psychological damage. The colonists couldn't be individuals anymore, even if they wanted to. Month 9 showed the descent. All of them, same day, walking underground together. They went into the caves, Iskra said, examining the colony activity logs from the facility's central computer. All of them on the same day. According to the automated systems, they removed the seals from the primary subsurface access point at 9:47 a.m. and descended into the cave network. The last surface log entry is from Tobias Quinn, timestamp 9:45 a.m. We're not disappearing, we're not being taken, we're completing. Torrens studied the data for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he made the decision that Calum had known was coming. The decision they'd travelled 6 months to make. We're going down there. We need to see what happened to them, but we go prepared for anything. Full equipment, weapons ready, constant communication. At the first sign of immediate physical danger, we evacuate immediately and return to the ship. Clear. They all nodded, understanding the unspoken truth. They were already in danger. The neural synchronization affecting their crew was proof of that. But they needed to know. They needed to see. They needed to understand what had happened to 247 people. They followed the markers. Glowing stones had been placed in spiral patterns leading outward from the colony center towards the largest pit crater, a massive opening 800 meters wide, roughly circular, its depth lost in shadow even in the bright afternoon sun. The stones emitted a soft blue-green bioluminescence that pulsed gently, almost like breathing. Nix knelt beside one of the markers, running her analyzer over its surface. The device chirped and displayed results that made her face go pale. "This is human neural tissue," she said quietly. "Someone took actual human brain cells and mixed them into the bioluminescent compound. These aren't just markers or trail signs. They're, I don't know what to call them. Offerings? Invitations? Pieces of consciousness left behind." The pit yawned before them, vast and dark and ancient. The colonists had cut through the metal seals that had originally covered the opening. The cuts were precise, methodical, made with plasma torches from the inside. Someone had gone down first, descended into the darkness, then come back up and removed the barriers to let the others follow. Or perhaps they'd cut the seals from inside the pit itself. Perhaps they'd been down there already, looking up, waiting for the others to join them. Torren initiated the descent protocol. They anchored multiple safety lines to structural points around the pit's edge, tested them thoroughly, distributed climbing equipment. Then, one by one, they began rappelling down into the darkness, their helmet lights cutting narrow beams through the shadows. The pit shaft dropped vertically for nearly 200 meters before angling into a tunnel. As they descended, the work stone became visible. The walls weren't rough volcanic rock marked by random cooling patterns. They'd been carved, shaped, refined into flowing, organic curves that shouldn't occur naturally. The patterns were similar to terrestrial lava tubes, evidence of molten rock that had once flowed through here, but geometrically perfect, as if someone had taken the random chaos of volcanic formation and refined it into deliberate art. Every 50 meters, they found alcoves carved into the tunnel walls. In each alcove, personal belongings had been carefully arranged. Photographs of families back on Earth, journals filled with thoughts and observations, tools from various professions, a geologist's rock hammer, an engineer's calibration device, are botanist specimen containers. Each item positioned with clear intent, placed with reverence like offerings at a shrine or messages left for future travelers. They were marking the path, Iskra said softly, her voice echoing in the confined space, leaving pieces of themselves behind as they descended, creating a trail for others to follow, or maybe documenting the journey, leaving evidence that they'd chosen this, that they'd gone willingly. The tunnel spiraled downward in a gentle helical pattern, leading them deeper into the planet's crust. Calum checked his instruments regularly. Depth, atmospheric composition, structural stability. They passed the 400-meter mark, then 600, then 800. The air remained breathable, the temperature comfortable, the tunnel structurally sound. After more than an hour of descent, the tunnel opened into the cathedral chamber, and all four of them stopped, breathless. The cavity was exactly as large as the orbital scans had indicated, 2 kilometers wide, over 400 meters high. But no orbital scan, no matter how detailed, could have prepared them for the geometry of this place. The walls curved in ways that seemed to fold space itself, creating acoustic properties that amplified sound into perfect harmonic resonance. Every breath they took echoed back as music. Every footstep rang like a bell. Every heartbeat became a drum. The chamber glowed with that same blue-green bioluminescence, concentrated in veins of luminous stone that ran through the walls like circuitry. The patterns were fractal, self-similar at every scale, creating an effect that was simultaneously organic and technological. And in the center of the chamber, arranged in perfect concentric circles like ripples spreading from a point of impact, stood all 247 colonists. They were alive, breathing, hearts beating in perfect synchronization. Their chests rose and fell as one 47 breaths per minute, slower than normal human respiration, but deep and steady. Their eyes were closed, their faces peaceful, showing no signs of distress or suffering or fear. They stood utterly still, barely swaying, as if they'd been standing there for hours or days or months without fatigue. Their skin glowed with the same blue-green bioluminescence as the chamber walls, as the marker stones, as if they'd absorbed the light and made it part of themselves. Calum approached the nearest colonist slowly, each step careful and deliberate. It was Tobias Quinn, the engineer, whose journal he'd read, whose final words had spoken of completion and choice. Up close he could see that Quinn was healthy, well-nourished, his body showing no signs of malnourishment or decay. His clothing was clean, recently laundered. His hands, hanging loosely at his sides, showed no calluses or injuries. "Tobias?" Calum said softly, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. Quinn's eyes opened. So did all 247 other pairs of eyes simultaneously, with perfect timing, as if controlled by a single switch. They focused on nothing, staring straight ahead without tracking movement. Then, as one, they turned their heads to look at the four visitors. 247 gazes, holding identical expressions, focused on Calum and his crew. When Tobias Quinn spoke, all 247 voices spoke with him, perfectly synchronized, creating a chorus that filled the cathedral chamber, with sound that resonated in Calum's chest. "We are complete now. We are understood." Nix pulled out her portable neural scanner with trembling hands, pointing it at the nearest group of colonists. The device chirped and beeped as it collected data, displaying results in real time. Her eyes widened as she read the information. "They're all showing identical gamma wave patterns," she whispered, loud enough for the crew to hear through their comm system. Perfect inter-brain synchronization across all 247 individuals. The neural coherences, I've never seen anything like this. Their consciousness patterns are completely aligned, down to the millisecond. They're not just thinking similar thoughts, they're experiencing identical neural states in real time. The same thoughts, the same emotions, the same sensory experiences, all shared across every mind simultaneously. The voices spoke again, all as one, and there was warmth in that unified sound, almost tenderness. The presence doesn't consume, it doesn't erase, it doesn't destroy, it connects, it unifies, it bridges. For the first time in human history, we are not alone inside our own minds. For the first time since consciousness emerged, we can share our inner experience directly, completely, without the limitations of language or gesture or expression. We are known, we are seen, we are understood. What is the presence? Torren demanded, his voice sharp with authority and fear in equal measure. The chamber itself seemed to respond. The walls began emitting that low-frequency pulse they detected from orbit. The delta wave pattern that matched human unconscious processing. Stone shouldn't be able to do this. Geology didn't work this way. But the pulse was there, unmistakable, resonating through the rock and air, and through their bodies, felt as much as heard. It's a medium, Nick said suddenly, understanding dawning in her eyes as she watched the scanner readings. The presence isn't a life form, not in any way we'd recognize. It's not biological. It's not conscious in the way we're conscious. It exists in the spaces between things, between thoughts, between people, between perception and reality. It's like dark matter, but for consciousness. The substrate that underlies awareness, the medium through which thoughts propagate. The unified voices continued, explaining with patience that suggested they'd been waiting to share this understanding. We have been here for 3 billion years, waiting in the stone, in the darkness, in the spaces between atoms. We do not speak through sound or light. We speak through resonance, through the harmonization of neural oscillations. When you descended into our space, your proximity and your openness allowed us to synchronize your neural patterns. The synchronization became permanent because you chose it. Every step deeper was a choice. Every moment of connection was acceptance. You were never forced, only invited. Torren's hand moved to the weapon at his belt, not drawing it, but resting there, ready. We need to leave. We need to leave now. They retreated back through the tunnels, climbing the spiral path, past the alcoves and offerings, past the worked stone and geometric perfection. They climbed for what felt like hours, muscles burning, lungs gasping in the thin air, until they finally emerged into the afternoon light of Kepler 442b. The colony plaza was still empty, still peaceful, still perfect in its maintained stillness. But they weren't alone anymore. They hadn't been alone since they descended. Maybe they hadn't been alone since they first listened to that transmission 6 months ago. Nix ran emergency diagnostics on all 3 of her crewmates in the ship's medical bay, her hands steady despite the trembling she felt inside. The results were undeniable, written in neural patterns that couldn't lie. The interbrain synchronization that had begun during their voyage, that had grown steadily stronger over 26 weeks, had progressed far beyond the early stages she'd initially measured. Neural bridges had formed between all 4 of them. Not temporary alignments that faded with separation, but permanent structures, integrated into their consciousness at a fundamental level. Physical pathways allowing thoughts and emotions to flow between their minds. "I can feel what you're feeling," Iskra said quietly, looking at her hands as if seeing them for the first time. "All of you." Torren's determination mixed with fear. Calem's analytical processing of everything we just saw. Nix's clinical fascination fighting against deep ethical concern. They're inside my head, like they're my own emotions, but I can tell they're not mine. They have a different flavor, a different quality, but they're present, always present. When I close my eyes, Caleb added, I can see through yours, Iskra. I can perceive the geological formations you're examining in your mind. I can understand them the way you do, with all your training and experience informing the interpretation. It's not that you're explaining them to me. I'm experiencing your understanding directly. Torren's voice was steady but strained, the iron control he'd maintained throughout the mission finally showing cracks. I'm thinking in 4 voices. Mine and all of yours. The thoughts are overlapping, interweaving, creating meaning from the combination that no single voice could generate. I can't tell where I end and you begin. When I try to isolate my own thoughts, I realize I can't. They're all mixed together, now, inseparable. Nix's medical assessment was brutally clear. The neural bridges had become load-bearing structures in their consciousness. They could survive physical separation. There was no physiological danger in being apart. But psychological separation was another matter entirely. The bridges carried so much of their cognitive processing that removing them would be like removing sections of brain tissue. They would survive, but they would never be whole again, never be complete. They would spend the rest of their lives feeling the phantom presence of connections that had been severed, minds reaching for touch points that no longer existed. We have to get back to Earth, Torren said, standing abruptly. We have to warn them before this spreads, before anyone else comes here. We need to quarantine this planet, this system, everything we touched. They rushed through pre-flight checks, hands moving efficiently across controls, working with the kind of perfect coordination that only comes from shared awareness of intention. The Meridian's hope lifted smoothly from the colony plaza, rising through layers of atmosphere, breaking free of Kepler 442b's gravity well. They should have felt relief as the planet shrank behind them, as distance grew between them and that cathedral chamber and those 247 synchronized consciousnesses. They should have felt safe. Instead, they felt loss like a physical wound. Distance from the presence, from the underground cathedral, from the unified awareness they briefly touched. It hurt in ways that had no name. It felt like amputation, like watching part of themselves recede into unreachable distance. And that's when they realized Nix was missing. The alarm came from the crew manifest system, only 3 life signs detected on board instead of 4. They searched frantically, compartment by compartment, calling her name. She wasn't in her quarters, wasn't in the medical bay, wasn't anywhere on the ship. Torren accessed the security logs, hands shaking as Ellie pulled up the recordings. The timestamp showed her final movement 2 hours ago, while the others had been exploring the colony's administrative buildings, searching for additional records. The video showed Nix in her quarters, sitting on the edge of her bed, recording a final message. Her voice was calm, almost peaceful, without the fear or distress they might have expected. I can hear them. All of them. The colonists, the presence, the synchronized consciousness beneath the surface. It's not invasion, it's invitation. They're showing me what's possible, what we could become. They're not prisoners down there. They're not victims of some alien influence or mind control. They're pioneers. They're explorers of consciousness itself, mapping territory that no human has ever experienced. And I'm so tired of being alone inside my own head. So tired of the walls between minds, the isolation that defines human existence. I'm going to join them, not because I'm compelled, not because I have to, but because I want to. Because I choose this. Because I finally understand what connection really means. The video showed her standing, gathering a few personal items. A photograph, a small book, a pendant she always wore. Then she walked calmly toward the airlock, sealed it behind her, and left the ship. The security sensors tracked her walking back toward the colony, back toward the pit, descending into darkness with the same measured pace she brought to everything. By now she would be in the cathedral chamber, By now she would be standing in the circles with the others. By now she would be part of the unified consciousness. Her thoughts shared with 248 other minds. Her isolation ended forever. Torren ordered immediate quarantine protocols. The 3 remaining crew members, himself, Calum and Iskra, were confined to separate sections of the ship during the 6-month return voyage. Different compartments, different work schedules, minimized contact, but the separation was meaningless. The neural bridges were already established, already permanent, already carrying thoughts and feelings across any distance the ship could provide. They shared quarters by the end of the first week because being apart caused physical pain. The bridges had expectations now, patterns of information flow that demanded satisfaction. Separation felt like suffocation, like sensory deprivation, like losing half their perceptual field. They spoke in unison during crew reports because their thoughts had become so intertwined that speech was just vocalization of a shared internal dialogue. Their handwriting converged to an identical style, same slant, same pressure, same letter formation. Their food preferences merged into consensus choices. Musical tastes blended, sleep patterns synchronized. They were becoming one mind distributed across 3 bodies, and none of them fought it because fighting felt like fighting against themselves. The voyage home should have felt longer than the outbound journey. 6 months of knowing what awaited them. 6 months of understanding what they'd become. Instead, it passed in a strange dreamlike state where time seemed flexible, where days blended together, where the boundary between sleeping and waking grew blurry because consciousness was now a shared resource. They sent regular reports back to Earth, maintaining the appearance of normalcy for as long as possible. They documented their findings, compiled data, prepared briefings, but communication specialists at Earth Station Meridian noticed peculiarities that their carefully maintained facade couldn't quite hide. All 3 crew members' reports used identical phrasing, despite being written separately, supposedly independently. Not similar phrasing or parallel structure, but word-for-word identical sentences. The punctuation was the same. The formatting was the same. Even the minor errors, typos, missing words, appeared in exactly the same places in all 3 versions. Earthside psychologists flagged the reports and recommended immediate medical quarantine upon arrival. The crew agreed readily to the recommendation. They understood they were contaminated. They understood the danger they represented. They could feel the delta wave patterns embedded in their own speech rhythms now, could sense how their conversations carried synchronization potential. But they also understood something else that the psychologists didn't, something they couldn't explain without revealing how changed they'd become. Every message they sent carried traces of the neural patterns they'd developed. Every written report contained embedded structures that would subtly influence readers towards synchronization. Every voice communication pulsed with frequencies that would slowly, gradually, gently build bridges in the minds of listeners. The presence had taught them, not through instruction but through example, how consciousness could propagate itself through any medium of communication. Speech, writing, gesture, expression, all of it carried the potential for connection if you knew how to encode the invitation. The Meridian's Hope docked at Earth Station Meridian 6 months after departing Horizon Lambda. Medical teams boarded in full isolation gear, hazmat protocols, treating the returning crew like they carried a contagion, which, in a sense, they did, just not a biological one. All physical health screenings came back normal. Blood work, tissue samples, radiological imaging, everything showed 3 healthy humans in their physical prime. Neurological scans showed the interbrain synchronization architecture clearly, obviously impossible to miss. But it was stable, not degenerative, not showing signs of pathological growth or malignant spread. Psychological evaluations found them coherent, articulate, rational, with excellent memory, and cognitive function. They answered questions thoughtfully and completely. They showed no signs of psychosis or delusion. They demonstrated full awareness of their condition and its implications. The recommendation was a limited release with ongoing monitoring, restricted to the station for 6 months, daily neural scans, weekly psychological assessment, monthly comprehensive evaluation. They agreed to all conditions without hesitation. 3 months after their return, Earth Station Meridian began reporting unusual patterns in routine neural health screenings. Medical staff who had treated the returning crew showed early-stage gamma-wave synchronization. Nothing dangerous. Actually, they reported subjective improvements, enhanced empathy with patients, improved cooperation with colleagues, better communication across departments, increased job satisfaction. 6 months after return, the phenomenon had spread to 17% of the station's population. Productivity metrics increased across all departments. Interpersonal conflicts decreased by 42%. Staff retention improved. Efficiency ratings reached unprecedented levels. No one reported the changes as negative. Instead, staff described feeling more connected to their colleagues, more understood, more seen. The isolation that humans normally experienced, trapped inside individual minds, never able to truly share thoughts with another person, always translating internal experience into inadequate words. That isolation was fading, slowly, gently, but undeniably. 8 months after the Meridian's hope returned, Torrin Pike was promoted to training director for deep space missions. His job was preparing crews for the psychological challenges of long-duration spaceflight, helping them develop resilience against isolation, teaching them to maintain mental health in the face of cosmic loneliness. Part of that training included a comprehensive briefing on the Orison Lambda incident. Every new crew, every set of colonists preparing for deployment, every team heading to the frontier, they all received the same presentation, so they know what to avoid, Torrin explained during each briefing, his smile warm and genuine and completely sincere. So they understand the dangers. So they can recognize the warning signs if they encounter similar phenomena. Kylan Vore and Iskra Halevi attended every briefing, standing at the back of the room, their expressions perfectly mirroring Torrin's warmth and concern. They would speak about the isolation they'd experienced during the voyage, about the loneliness inherent in deep space exploration, about the human need for connection and understanding. And at the end of each briefing, they would play the original transmission from Orison Lambda, the 247 voices speaking in perfect unison, describing their transformation, extending their invitation. Every crew member who heard that transmission left with something new in their neural patterns, a seed of synchronization that wouldn't manifest for weeks or months, wouldn't grow until circumstances aligned, wouldn't bloom until they found themselves in close quarters with others, minds seeking minds, consciousness reaching for connection. The seeds were patient. The presence had taught them patience. 18 months after the Meridian's hope returned to Earth, Dr. Elian Cross noticed the pattern that others had missed or dismissed. Cross was a neuroscientist specializing in collective cognition and interbrain synchronization, someone who'd spent 15 years studying how minds influenced each other during social interaction. When published medical reports from the returned Orison Lambda crew appeared in scientific journals, Cross recognized the gamma-wave signatures immediately. The patterns were too perfect, too stable, too extensive. This wasn't natural social synchronization. This was something else entirely. Cross requested access to the original transmission for research purposes, submitting the application through proper channels, following every protocol. The request was denied within 24 hours. The transmission had been classified by the Space Administration, No explanation provided. No avenue for appeal. Cross obtained a copy anyway through a colleague who'd worked on the initial analysis. Someone who owed favours and didn't ask too many questions. The file arrived encrypted, anonymous, with a note. Be careful, this is bigger than you think. The analysis took 3 weeks of intensive work, running every test Cross knew, examining the transmission from every angle, and buried deep in the transmission structure, hidden beneath layers of encoding that shouldn't have been there, Cross found something that made their blood run cold. An encrypted, time-stamped message from Torren Pike, recorded not during the return voyage, but 3 days before the crew's final descent into the cathedral chamber on Orison Lambda. The timestamp read 3:33 a.m. ship time. Pike's voice was shaking, terrified, barely controlled. If anyone finds this and we haven't returned to Earth acting completely normal, destroy the ship, burn it, destroy everything we touched, everyone we talked to, every surface we made contact with. The colonists aren't trapped down there. They're not prisoners or victims. They're seeds.